Chamai, welcome. We are going to have a conversation today with tribal leaders on tribal sovereignty and its applicability to museums, hosted by First Alaskans Institute and Museums Alaska. And I'll pass it over to Dixie for our welcome.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for coming. This is the third webinar, if I'm not mistaken, of our 6 webinar series. I am Dixie Clough. I'm the director of Museums Alaska. This is a statewide museum association here in Alaska. I began my position last April and moved to the state last May. And I moved here from Florida, but I mostly grew up in Maryland outside of the DC area. When I started this position, I wanted to get a feel for what museums might need from us as an association. And I spoke to several board members and museum colleagues across Alaska. And I heard many times that fostering meaningful relationships with Alaska Native tribes and Indigenous peoples was something that a lot of museums wanted to do, but maybe didn't know how to start, or they'd started, but they didn't know how to really build on those relationships. So we were interested in creating a program that would help build these relationships and keep them going into the future. But we also knew that we couldn't do it alone. Absolutely not. I've said it before in the other webinars, and I'll say it again. But I'm a white woman who moved to Alaska last year, and I am not the person to lead these conversations. I know about museum practice, but I can't speak to the experiences that Alaska Native individuals have had when visiting museums, or experiences that individuals and tribes have had when working with museums or even in museums. So I knew, however, that there was an organization in Alaska who could maybe help us bridge that gap in knowledge, and that was First Alaskans Institute. The board and I kind of had them at the top of our list of people we really wanted to partner with. And right when we started to kind of think about, okay, how might we be able to partner? What might this program look like? IMLS, the Institute of Museum and Library Services, had some ARPA funding for its COVID relief funding, and they were giving it out to libraries across the country. And we were very, very lucky. The Alaska State Library decided to share it with museums as well. And we knew that this program could actually be a really good fit for that grant funds. So we jumped at the opportunity. We reached out to First Alaskans, and they were so great. They jumped right on board with us. It's all been kind of like really fast. We just started planning last year. And I'm so impressed. I'm so impressed with First Alaskans Institute and all of the thoughtfulness you put into it, how many people on your team have participated. And I cannot thank you guys enough for everything that you've done to help put this program together and to host it. I know that I've learned so much from the webinars and the cohort that we're doing with the webinars. And I know I've heard from other people and they have too. So thank you so much. I know that we're going to learn even more today from our amazing speakers. Thank you. So I'm going to go ahead and stop talking and let everyone else take over. Thank you.
Dixie, thank you so much, and really is an honor to be chosen to help guide the conversation and help lead through the dialogue. Sangay la uflang, the day is getting good. Wáahlaal Gíidaak hinudi ki'ang, Barbara Blake ya'at satay hinudi ki'ang. My name is Wáahlaal Gíidaak. The HL in my name make a sound. So if you push the tongue to the roof of your mouth and you blow out the sides of your cheeks, it makes a sound. And that same sound can be found in the Lingít language, as well as Athabascan Dene languages as well. And I believe there's a few other dialects or other languages in our state that also have that similar sound to it. So it's good to learn because it will help you also in speaking some of the other words that are in our beautiful languages throughout Alaska. My English name is Barbara Blake. My family is from Hiktahunglai, otherwise known as Heidelberg. I am Yak Janas, or Raven from the Shark House. My grandfather's people are Tla'ain'idi, Dog Salmon from Ťláa, otherwise known as Kalaax. And my father's people are the Nelchina, the Sky Clan. My father's people are Ahtna Athabascan, and they come from Chestachina. I serve currently as the director of the Alaska Native Policy Center with First Alaskans, and calling in today from Xantakahini, otherwise known as Juneau, the homelands of the Kaaxwáan and the greater Juneau Douglas area, the Kaaxwáan as well. And I will pass it over to Silugngataanit'sqaq.
Yeah, Kaaxwáan Hawa Wáahlaal Gíidaak. Chumai everybody, we Silugngataanit'sqaq up to Ahtna Melissa Marton, Shunami Shuchlianga, Ektaxluga, Pektaxluga, Ferndelmi. My Sugpiaq name is Silugngataanit'sqaq. I'm originally from Kodiak Island, born and raised there, lived there my whole life up until April. I just recently relocated to Washington. I'm down here on Coast Salish land, trying to be closer to my sister, and it's definitely time, but I do miss being at home as well. I am FAI's Indigenous Operations and Innovations Director, and prior to that, I worked for the Native Village of Afognak as the tribal administrator for almost 15 years. So I'm very passionate about tribal sovereignty and this discussion as well, and I'm looking forward to spending our time together. I'll turn it over to Cutmen.
Chumai, we Cutmen up the Ahtna Candace Branson. We Sunami Ṭláa Irene Dundas. I was born and live in Kodiak. My Sukhstun name is Cutmen. My English name is Candace Branson, and I am the Advancement Director, Indigenous Advancement Director for FAI. Very excited to be part of these conversations and hear from our community on what tribal sovereignty in museums looks like. I'd like to start us off with a land acknowledgement. I live and work on the land of the Sugpiaq, but we are calling in from Indigenous lands across the state of Alaska, and we want to express our gratitude for the stewardship of the Indigenous people of that land who have rigorously upheld the stewardship since time immemorial. The First Alaskans Institute and Museums Alaska offices are located in Gíidaak, which is also known as Anchorage, and that's on Dena'ina land. With that, we'll start with Shiloh.
Yeah, Kliana Cutmen. As Dixie said earlier in her welcome, we've been working on planning this series and this cohort for almost a year now. And we're extremely grateful to be able to have this opportunity with Museums Alaska to work towards building better relationships between Alaska's museums and Alaska's Native people, and predominantly our tribes, which is why we're here for the discussion today. We see this as an excellent opportunity to bring our Native voices from across the state into this discussion, to be able to have real conversations with museum professionals. And we're really excited for not just the cohort that's been a part of this discussion now for 5 weeks, Cutmen. I think this is the 5th in the series, right? And we still have a few more weeks left. They engaged in 2 weeks worth of training, and then every week since then has been listening to our leaders from across the state on specific subjects, and then following it up a couple days later with some real discussion about how to make change within museums. So our efforts to be able to have these real conversations and examine what it looks like to decolonize and indigenize our museums is such a great opportunity. And I know I'm grateful to be able to have sat in on parts of the discussion that I have been able to. We also see this as an opportunity to engage our non-Native family to be able to build these more meaningful relationships between our museums and our Native community. Alaska always has and will always be a Native place. And what is good for Alaska Native people is good for all people. We each have a responsibility to do what we can to create a better future, and we can't do that without having these real discussions. It's easy to miss or not realize what we have inherited in these systems that we're working in, and that have and are still causing harm to our people. So this is an opportunity now to reshape them. However, we can't do that without confronting racism systemically, institutionally, and all of the harms that have come to our Alaska Native people over the years. Wáahlaal Gíidaak.
Yeah, and this week is particularly, they're all important conversations. This week we've asked some of our tribal leaders, those who are active and involved in our governance structures, to come and speak with us and have a conversation about the important role our tribes play in our communities, the important role that they play when it comes to our sacred objects and our, I should say, our sacred relatives, in terms of what that means to us and what it means to our tribal governance and all of that. And so with that, we have two amazing ladies who work within the realm of tribal governance, who serve on the governance of their tribe, and would like to pull them forward and have them introduce themselves. And we'll start with Irene. Kalaax Ṭláa.
Good morning. Yes, my Lingít name is Kalaax Ṭláa. I am Xaadas from Kaaxwáan. I come from the house that anchored the village. I am Nechadiyaki. My father is from Saxman, or Cape Fox Sanya people. I work for Kaaxwáan Indian community as the cultural heritage specialist, which I was tasked to infuse culture into all aspects of the tribe and the community. I also do family trees, and I also do repatriation and NAGPRA. I worked for Cape Fox Corporation for about 23 years doing NAGPRA as the repatriation program manager. I currently serve on the Smithsonian Repatriation Review Committee and on the Kaaxwáan Historical Commission. And I thank you for inviting me here tonight to be a part of the, or not tonight, this morning, to be a part of the conversation. So Chish.
Kaaxwáan.
Yak Etutat. Kaaxwáan Lingít Ṭláa Dawn Jackson Uqaq Sagwadi Naqatsiti Gíidaak Ayaqat Kachariadi Ayaqat Dakdaintan Ayaqaq Dakanuku. Good morning. My name is Kaaxwáan. My tax name is Dawn Jackson. I am Sagwadi also from Keith. I live and work in Keith, which is in the heart of Lingít. I am calling in from the homelands of the Duwamish. I'm currently on vacation. I am from the Yellow Cedar House. I am also a child of the Kachari and a grandchild of the Dakdaintan. My professional role in my village is I'm an executive director of the organized village of Keith, the tribe in Keith. I am a proud mother of two. That is my main job. Also a daughter of Mike and Edna Jackson in Keith. I got my master's degree in museum studies at University of British Columbia. However, I'm a recovering anthropologist and I'm not active in the field, but I'm very passionate about museums and the treasures that they hold still. And I'm going to be going after a few pieces. So that's me in a nutshell.
Chinan, thank you so much, ladies, for joining us and for your dedication and the time that you're taking away from the important work that I know both of you do to be with us and to help guide the conversation and shape it into something that can be helpful across Alaska. And so with that, we have our first question for both of you, and whoever would like to go first, please just jump right in. But our first question is, why is it important to care for our sacred relatives? What purpose does it serve our community?
So I guess maybe I could give an example quite recently. about maybe 4 years ago, there was a gentleman who had received a beautiful, beautiful halibut hat. Probably, what year was it? In 1925. And in Lingít, clan hats are these big wooden, hats. They're pretty sacred. They have a Tlingit name. Usually a song is, goes along with it. So sacred that when a clan hat comes out, an opposite clan has to bring the same value out for a balance. And so this clan hat, a well-known family in town, who's also lived, they're a Japanese family, who's lived in Kaaxwáan for 100 and something years, probably more. Anyways, the family received this hat from a clan house leader. And you got to remember, in this time, probably in the 1920s, there was lots of things going on in Southeast Alaska. Kids were getting sent off to boarding schools. It wasn't good to be Indian at the time. Alaska, people were in Alaska moving around, but it was kind of rough. There was the fishing going on, all that politics, the state of Alaska, the whole thing was just kind of a little bit rugged back then. And so anyways, this house leader had said, I want to send my kids to school, and I'm gonna, would you mind purchasing this hat? And he, wrote a letter to the museum or to the family and said, thank you very much for, purchasing the hat, and, it's changing times. And anyways, it was about 2 weeks ago, my uncle Harvey Shields and I and Willard Jackson were standing on the beach at Cape Fox, which is 50 miles south of here. It's a beautiful beach. You don't hardly get to go down to the beach or down to that area at Cape Fox because it's 50 miles south. It takes about 2 hours to get down there. It's a beautiful white sandy beach, like the beaches of Hawaii, but fluffy, the fluffy powder beach. Anyways, we're sitting there or standing there, and all the kids were, in the water, and the museum called, and I have these recordings from one of the last house leaders of my father's people, and he's talking about the halibut that they caught on the mountain. It's a story of my father's people, of how they acquired the clan crest of the halibut hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years ago in misty fjords. And it gives out Tlingit names. The clan or the house leader really goes into detail about the migration and the clans that were there at the village, and then about a young man who goes on top of the mountain when their family was, they just came out of winter, and so they needed to get food. Anyways, he's telling the story, and then the museum calls, and the museum says, we have a gentleman who just brought in a halibut hat, and we want to start a conversation on how we can give, I want to cry right now, how we can give the hat back to the rightful owners. And I said to the museum director, I said, you don't even know, we're standing in Cape Fox Village. The story of the halibut hat is playing from the last house leader, and the tape is from 1973, and I'm playing it, on a big speaker across the village down there at Cape Fox. My uncle, his opposite was there. It couldn't have been a more beautiful, right place, setting, like magical. There's kids in the background, you know, playing in the water. That was, I think, it was like all meant to be. The sacredness, it connected the hat from, you know, hundreds of years ago to present day. And the fact that the museum, you know, wanted to make this right was so extremely beautiful and the most precious thing that could have happened, you know, for my father's clan. And last week, the museum just signed an agreement to my uncle, my father's people, and how they could bring out the hat during ceremony. And so my father's people or my uncle's family will then have the opportunity to bring out the hat. The opposite clan will then be able to tell the story to the present day clan members and opposite clan members. So carrying on the history and having the connection to the families and the clan families several hundreds of years ago, because we believe the hat is probably at least 200 years old, maybe even older. The last clan leader who wore the hat received the hat when he was 10 years old and received several ku'iks for him to receive it. And so, and all that gets to be brought out. It just brings so much warmth to my heart. And I mean, it just makes me like, we're still here, you know, the museum is not, you know, putting us in a display case where it could be, you know, it's living. We're still here, and, you know, ceremonies is still carrying on. So that's my share of a long story. I apologize, but that's sacred to me, and that's the reason why I feel like, you know, it's so important that museums make those connections to the families and to the clans and the Indigenous people that are in their communities.
Ṭláa. I have to continue to practice saying that. Beautiful story, and please don't apologize. We're here to hear your voice and to hear Kaaxwáan's voice in this space, and so please don't apologize. It was it's a beautiful introduction to what it means to have these relatives return back to us, and the beautiful connection of not only to the immediate generation, but the stories that are being told, and the connection to our ancestry that exists, and the breeze within each object. And object just seems so wrong, each relative. And so I'm so thankful that you kicked us off with that beautiful story, and I could feel it. I could feel the moment that it reached you folks. And so I'm thankful that you brought that into this space for the first conversation that we're having. Kaaxwáan, did you want to share anything?
What a beautiful story, Irene. Just get me all my feels before I have to talk about mine. So, you know, as everybody knows, and I'm sure you talked about it in the previous webinars, but you know, before I share about why it's important to care for these precious objects and these living things, and even the items that are meant to be at rest and not handled by anybody, you know, just a little, and I think everybody should be learning history of our region or the region that you live in. I come from a community of amazing resilience. And I just want to acknowledge my uncle, Robert Hoffman, who's on the call. He's one of my mom's younger brothers, amazing artist, who lives in Kaaxwáan currently. Also my son Chakti. So, with the history of my community, since contact, we've been known to be fierce, savage-like, and those were misconstrued and used wrong. I come from ancestors that were defending their territory. I come from large families with a large traditional area, especially my father's people are Kachari. And so since contact, with the destruction of our villages, our village being bombed by the U.S. Army in 1869, and our community rebuilding from then, only to burn down in 1926. And also with the onslaught of Western religion, shaming our ways of life and our language out of us. I believe, it was around this time of our language and our ways of life being shamed out of us, that our items were being taken, from burials, from caves, people selling, our local people selling for Western money, because that was the only way to live, since contact. So, some of our items were sold away and taken out of our region, sometimes internationally, but I feel like this is a time when our people went to sleep, and we never fully went away. We still lived and thrived in our village, refused to leave our villages. But also at this time, my grandparents' generation was sent off to residential school or boarding school in Sitka, and it was this generation that raised a generation of silence. My parents are part of that generation. And, as I was growing up, I was fortunate enough that my parents pursued Western higher education. And when they committed to going to school in Oregon, they were severely homesick. And so, if we weren't on the coast, on the ocean, we were in museums so that my dad could look at the collections. My dad is an artist as well as my mother. And so I grew up in these museums and art galleries and, all of the things. So what I thought was boring because they weren't child things, I was actually soaking up what my parents were studying, drawing, and taking pictures of. My dad has a plethora of pictures of items from all over in the museums. So, when for my generation that was raised in Egypt with the generation of silence, my parents gave me the space to learn on my own. And when you go into these museums, it's emotional. Probably most of the stuff that I see from cake in museums are actually burial items. So it's, it's really, I don't touch them. I look at them and I admire the work that, that they were made for. But with the museums caring for them since contact, it puts me back in contact with my ancestors. And it gives me the space to learn from them. Sometimes people view them as, dead objects or objects of the past, but you know, they were created for something. People, you know, our people didn't just create to create or to make things to sell. These items in the museum were made for ceremony. They were, you know, whether someone was moving into another realm or, you know, passing into another dimension, or something was made to remember ancestors, or you know, songs were created sometimes during some of these objects, and some of the songs that we sing take us back to those moments. They're tied to these objects, so it's, you know, these things are objects that have moved through time, just as our spirits have, and they keep us connected, and they inspire more learning. They inspire more songs. They inspire more names. They inspire us to speak our language. And to me, that's sovereignty. That's who we are. And no one can take that from us. And, you know, despite the efforts of the government to try to erase us from the land, because we're so, you know, we took such good care of our lands that people thought nobody lived there. And because of that, you know, we had squatters, immigrants come to our traditional territories and steal our land, including the government. And despite their efforts to try to erase us from the landscape, we are still here. Was that the question?
Yeah, no, that's absolutely the question. I love how you brought in the sovereignty component of this. You know, the governments of the world like to define what sovereignty is and what it means to have an individual nationhood or an individual government. And you know, a lot of that definition involves having culture and a separate culture from that of what is now the United States, even though, you know, the United States doesn't really have a culture of its own. But the people do. Our 229 tribes do have a unique culture. Each individual one has a specific culture and value system and rootedness. And I love that you're tying it to these relatives that are still existing and still alive in these places, and a connection to our ancestors, a connection to lost history, a connection to lost culture is revived with each one of these relatives that grace us with their presence, whether or not we get to visit them inside of a museum or whether or not they're returning home to us. We can feel it. And I love that you're also bringing the fact that our elders and some of our parents' generation are remembering with each one of these relatives that they encounter. They're remembering a buried memory that has been long forgotten, but that is revived with each and every one of these objects that are gracing us with their presence. So appreciate all of that, Kaaxwáan. And Wáahlaal Ṭláa, I'm gonna keep practicing. Silugngataanit'sqaq.
Yeah, goodness, sheesh, ladies, for telling us those stories. You know, when I think about that particular question as well, and my time working for a Fognac, I had a couple of different experiences working with the museums in our area, and all, for the most part, they were all very positive experiences. One of the museums that we work really heavily with is an Alutiiq Sugpiaq owned museum. So we were always working with our own people, and in an effort to really preserve our culture, and not just preserve it, but really to be in a state of thriving. And it took a lot of learning. we went through a period where we were discovering, like you mentioned, Kaaxwáan, internationally. Our Sugpiaq artifacts are all over the world, but predominantly in France and Russia. And we didn't have any access to those things in our own area. So our people went through a huge loss of culture and identity. Our language, we came down to only having 17 fluent speakers at a time when our young people were hungry for learning our language and learning about our culture, and really the heart of it was that connection to our ancestors, that connection to our identity, who we are. We didn't know that much about our culture and traditions because most of it had been taken away or lost. So we went through a period of doing our hardest to learn as much as we could and finding little pockets of people that could bring back some of those traditions. And it was a long battle of fighting. One of the early leaders within our Alutiiq Museum started building relationships with, it started with one of the French museums, just so that we could have access to the many masks that they had from our region. We didn't have those anymore. We had only a very, very small handful of carvers that were recreating things. But for the most part, we didn't know that much about the masks, why they were created, what they were used for, what they looked like. You know, there's the complexity of all of it. And it took a really long time to build those relationships with that museum, just so they would let us see the items. Under no circumstances would they let the item leave the museum. And what I understand from the leader at that time is it took him approximately 10 years to build that relationship with that French museum, just so we could see them. He did finally get to a point to where the masks were brought home. And it was, I can't even tell you how amazing it was to see them, to see how big they were. You know, I had no idea how big all of the masks were. And they had songs that were translated and put on the inside of the mask. And that connection, the things that we learned from that period of time about our culture, about our masks, what they were used for, was invaluable. But they're still in France. We do get to see them on occasion, but that French museum holds very, very tightly their ownership of our history, our ancestors, our people. So I have mixed feelings about it, I guess. I'm grateful that they've been able to preserve those masks for as long as they have. But I also feel very strongly that it's time for them to come home, because we're in this state of doing our best as leaders now to continue to teach our children so that they can get to a state where they're not having to fight anymore. And we need to have access to those things. So I guess that's kind of where my head is in that. So next question for you ladies. And maybe this is something that you currently work with in your roles, or maybe this is something that you've encountered in previous roles that you've held. How do you feel museums are working towards building relationships with our Alaska tribes and honoring their sovereignty? And how do you think they can do things to improve?
So I've done a repatriation or NAGPRA with many museums across the country, with goodness sakes, I had to write the list down. Burke, the Smithsonian, Field, Cornell, UC Berkeley, well, the earthquake destroyed a totem pole. And Harvard Peabody also did some with the human remains with the state of Alaska SHPO office. But so I think when I started doing repatriation, which was years ago, the museums were very difficult to work with. Well, back then there was, we can't text anybody. I wasn't texting anybody, couldn't get on the, sounds like, goodness sakes, I sound like I'm like 500 years old. Couldn't text, couldn't get on the internet. So we were, writing to the museums to ask for all the information that they had. And sometimes it would take, months to get information. But one museum, the Field Museum in Chicago, at first it was quite difficult because there was, a thing like unknown statements that the museums were like making across the country that, the Native Americans were just going to swoop up and take all the, the artifacts that they've been holding on to, our clan property, our ancestors. And that necessarily really wasn't the case, because it's so difficult to try to repatriate anyways, because you have to prove right of possession. And the museum, I guess, I felt like it was such a sterile conversation. It was, you go in and you're you just say, these are our pieces. And so I guess to prove, that those pieces belong to us, I think was a big effort in itself. But then, as we started building relationships with the museums, what Cape Fox Corporation did when we did the repatriation for the Harriman expedition pieces that were taken from Cape Fox Village, Cape Fox turned around and donated a yellow or a red cedar log back to the museums. And so the Burke has 2 totems that were carved by Nathan Jackson and Stephen Jackson. The Smithsonian has a totem pole that was also carved by Nathan. Cornell did not have a totem pole carved. The Field Museum also did, and the Harvard Peabody also had. So we donated logs to all those museums, thanking, the museums for holding our pieces for as long as they did, holding our clan property, because we felt that there was a full circle of healing that happened. And that took a little while, though. That took a lot of relationship building. It didn't happen overnight. And I guess maybe comparing it to a couple of years ago, I did go to a couple museums in 2019 in California, and the museums were so open, way different than what I experienced 15 to 20 years ago. And this sounds so weird to say, but it really was a transition in administration. When I was, doing repatriation, 15, 20 years ago, there was a older group of people, and that kind of, I felt, were in this old, I guess, mindset of how museums, acquired or took care of, those pieces. And then in 2019, there was young curators and directors, you know, right out of school. And the mindset has changed, I felt, for the few that I went to. Very open. Some of the museums, or two of the museums that we went to, were under construction or just got done with construction. And they built spaces in their museums for ceremony. And so instead of going into like a room where it's, you know, this, they put a table out, you know, they pull our clan property out and you're, you know, handling it with gloves and, you know, which was the case with, you know, some of the pieces that we viewed, but the museum had an outdoor space that had a fire pit that was that they built right into the I don't even know what it was. It was a beautiful space, and they just they allowed for ceremony, which I cannot say 15 to 20 years ago that was the same case. But they incorporated it, the relationships and the conversations that they had, I'm assuming, with Native Americans across the country. And there was, I believe, the gal that one of the museums, she was Native American herself. And so to foster that conversation and just have a different mindset from what was going on, you know, 20 years ago, I believe is changing. Well, I think because people are retiring, and there's a new, you know, there's a new mindset of people that are going into the field. And I hope that we still continue to grow those, you know, those peoples, the curators and directors. But that space was really beautiful. They had benches along the side. It was in a circle. They allowed for food burning, which is, you know, part of ceremony for many Indigenous peoples across the country, in ways to talk to, you know, our ancestors or connect our ancestors with you know, spirit plates. So I think change is happening. I just don't know. I can't speak for all the museums across the country, but I have been to several of them. And I think some more museums can do exactly what some of the museums in California are doing, is creating a space to allow ceremony and to allow conversation, so that we could have a connection or reconnect to our clan property.
I appreciate how you brought in reciprocity into that story, and working with the museum in a way that honors who we are as people. It was
really beautiful. They you know, our people had, so my father's people had moved from Cape Fox Village in 1899, and then but they were thinking about moving 17 years before that. So when we started doing repatriation in, goodness sakes, in 2000, the elders that we had alive back then, they weren't even, you know, they weren't even twinkles in an eye for them to even remember some of those pieces. And so it was just, so there was a big information and learning new history that we haven't learned before, or it wasn't a part of I guess maybe the stories that we knew from like the Saxman Totem Park or songs and dances. And so when we started making that connection with the museums, all that history, started coming out, and it was really beautiful. So we told that history and the story on the in the museum, and then we were able to tell the history here, and that connected the families and the clans, and it really was a beautiful ceremony, and it brought clan leaders to Chicago and to New York, and they really got to make a connection to the museum. So it was wonderful.
I don't have the depth of experience with all the museums like my sister has, but I believe that the museum that we currently work with, our community, the State Museum in Juneau, has really built up a relationship over the past few decades of taking care of objects that have come back home when clans and communities don't have the space to properly care for them, even though, in thousands of years before contact, they were, in the tribal houses and whatnot, they weren't in climate controlled and, with the proper temperature and humidity. They were, they were just part of everyday within our tribal houses. But when I left, when I moved back to Alaska after I received my education, my thesis was on NAGPRA and how it was being implemented into our little communities. And just from my experience as a Native person in a graduate program that was within the Museum of Anthropology, I left there just bitter. And just, the relationships then, just like what Irene was Ṭláa was sharing, they're very colonial. In some respects, it still can be in the larger cities. But I really like hearing of new experiences and a younger generation coming into the museums, whether they're Native or non-Native. I feel like these institutions should be more living. There should be flowing in and out of these buildings, relationships. Relationships are ever evolving, and it takes two to make something work really well. And if it's worked right, you learn so much from one another, and that's how tradition is born. Is these new ways of being and adjusting. Change is something that change isn't easy. It can be painful for some. But it's in those moments where we learn a lot, and it's an opportunity. We've for 250 plus years, my people have been adjusting, and adjusting so much more than the invading, the people that came into my territory. We've had to adjust, and I feel like because of all these changes that have happened, we're stronger for it. So much more stronger than the people that came into our territory. So, when there's these moments of learning, I soak it in. I really soak it in, and it's not just with the people that are not of my community, but with these objects that I get to interact with again. What knowledge and history that they have in them, and I feel like the places that are are caretaking for them right now should do the same. And I realize that the items that are on display are just a fraction of what is in the collections in the basement or other buildings or in the back rooms. I've seen them, and it's mind-blowing how much is in the back rooms of these institutions. But I feel like it's a responsibility of the people that are getting paid to work there, that they should be learning from the people that these objects came from. That's what they get paid to do. That's their job. And I look forward to seeing more interactions and more relationships being born out of that. Yeah,
Yeah, Gunesh Chish for that. I agree. I think that even a series like what we're going through right now with museums is a great first step in just being able to have these discussions and open up the opportunities for what it means to us to build these meaningful relationships. But I agree with you that it's also it's something that is two-way. So I know not every community is going to be open to those relationships right away. So it's going to take work. It's going to take work and hard change. Gunesh Chish for bringing that into the space. Wáahlaal, Gíidaak?
Yeah, both of your perspectives in this space, as we're thinking about tribes and what it means to be a sovereign. I love that Kalaax Ṭláa brought in that that the French Museum, as we're talking about what all of this means and what it means to be a sovereign, right? We have our own set of cultural practices, our cultural norms associated with those practices, our own languages distinct from each other. And it's important that those cultural ties, that history, that these legacies of our value systems and cultural practices, whether it has to do with our burials, whether it has to do with how we celebrate in ceremony, all of these things have our cultural relatives, otherwise known as objects, associated with them. And they exist in all spaces in our culture and within our practice system, in our practices. And the more we can solidify what it means to be a Lingít person, to be a Kaaxwáan tribal member, the more that our sovereignty is enhanced, the more that we see that those cultural practices tie us to that place and tie us to those clan systems. And it only goes to enhance our ability to decolonize and indigenize these systems that have been come to known as tribes in the United States of America, but these systems that were forced upon us by the federal government in terms of the Indian Reorganization Act and so on and so forth. But really thinking about what it means to bring back our culture, bring back our practices, bring back our own governance structure is all tied to these relatives and these objects. And I'm just thankful that you're bringing that into this space and helping others and helping us to see that. Our next question is pretty similar in that vein, in talking about what do you think museums should be doing in order to honor the sovereignty of our tribes?
I think that there is just conversations that need to happen, make connections to the tribes. I know that through, NAGPRA, there's I guess maybe it's common that usually it's administration contacts, the administration of the museum. But making those connections, I think, is extremely important, starting the conversation. I serve on the Smithsonian Repatriation Review Committee right now, and the Smithsonian has a technology, that sounds so goofy. It has a technology, I don't even know what it's a 3D printer that does intense printing, where I believe it's on YouTube. There's a YouTube clip of the Smithsonian recreating a Tlingit clan hat. And when I seen that, the presentation from the Smithsonian on the history and how that was brought out, and how the clan had made connections with the museum and expressed the sacredness of the clan hat, and also the museum staff were well versed on the Tlingit ceremonies and the clan systems and the social structure, that the museum was aware of the sacredness of the hat. And the hat it's reprinted. It sounds like that's such a odd, but it brought tears to my eyes when Mr. Hollinger was explaining about the process, and the clan treated the hat just like how the hat was treated, hundreds of years ago, or even in present day. It was quite amazing that that the museum, went to that effort, because also some clan property cannot be used because of the insecticides that were put on the museum or on the property to preserve it. So I don't know if that was the specific case for this particular hat, but the museum reached out and I felt like was taking a part of the responsibility to carry on history and to carry on ceremony, and made that connection with the clans and with the tribe, that allowed a bigger conversation to happen. I believe they'll be doing a presentation about that at the clan conference in Wrangell next month. But I can't say every museum should do that, but or if they have the funds to do that, because in reality, I would like for just all of our items to come home so that they could be with our own people. But I know that there is there are policies and laws in place that does not allow that all the time. But just making that connection to the people, getting that conversation going, I think is a start.
Absolutely. The first step in any good relationship is strong communication. I've seen some really terrible moments in governance where communication, sorry, this one talking next to me, but where communication is left to letter writing, and you can get really sideways really fast, right? It's like texting with somebody and you misunderstand what they're texting you, when you can just have a conversation and grow that relationship. And so I'm glad to see that there's a foundation in what you're describing, and in what is what could be a very healthy relationship moving forward. Kaaxwáan, did you want to share anything?
No, I think I probably answered that in the previous question. I just liken the relationship. As an employee of a tribe, a federally recognized tribe, we do have government to government consultations with other federal agencies. Sometimes those, in the capacity at the tribe, we do work with federal agencies in regard to human remains or anything found on the Tongass National Forest. But I think it's just a responsibility of the institutions, the museums, to work on this level with the communities. It's community to community, basically, and fostering good relationships. We on any given day, I'm interacting with up to 5 to 6 other federal agencies. I have to know the history of those agencies. I have to know the people that are working there. It's just icing on the cake when, some of those employees share something about themselves. They're not just a person working in that agency. So I've in the same, on the same level, museums should be also learning more about the people that, the stuff that they house. It just should be part of their job, just like it's a part of my job to learn with who I'm engaging with.
Totally agree that there's a fundamental understanding, and we started off with the question of why this is important. What does it mean to you to have our relatives returned, and what do our relatives, our sacred objects, mean to you? And similar conversation could be had with each other to help us understand where museums are coming from in this relationship. What does this mean to you? Not just the educational experience you're getting from having our objects in your care, but what does it mean to you as an individual? And I love that thought process. Silugngataanit'sqaq.
Yeah, I know, Kaaxwáan, you're not able to stay with us the whole time. So I wanted to bring about kind of our next question is really about story. Do you have a lesson or a story about an interaction that you had with a museum that you'd want to share with the group today?
I haven't had the opportunity to have a lot of interactions with museums. My job doesn't take me to those places. However, when we did receive funding, I was involved in a couple of NAGPRA grants with our tribe. And I was blessed to have to do the travel logistics for a handful of our elderly Native men who can be really high maintenance. And I think my memories of NAGPRA and museums and interacting with our precious ancestors is my memories with those elders. There's also a later trip that I had with our elder, Dr. Canuck, Ruth Demert. And 20 years ago, when we initially went and saw the items that were from my village, in both the New York City Museum and also the Burke Museum here, some of the items were battle tunics. And what I thought was moose hide, it was actually sea lion hide, and it was double layer tunics. And there were these beautifully, there was one that was painted, one that wasn't, but the one that the doctor was sitting next to, we know where it came from, where it was taken out of. And you could barely see it, but if you had those lights that you could see body fluids, or I don't know what they're called. But if you turn them on, it's obvious that there was blood, on it. And she sat there and cried. And she spoke to the tunic, how good it was to see him again. And that we're going to bring him home soon. So that is something that has stuck with me. And that's our history. Someone fought a good hard battle and was taken from the Kaaxwáan. You know, and so much so that they paid reverence to that tunic and put it away safely, and you know, someone took it. So you know, it's time to get these things back. And they're not things, you know, they're history, and they're living things, and they're moments in time that can bring lessons to our kids, our grandkids, my great grandkids. What an amazing people we come from. So resilient. I have a lot of memories with these elders after both trips, and I learned so much from them. You know, the SNAGPRA and bringing things back, and these relationship museums are so new. And I think we can be in spaces that can be healthier. You know, dismantling and reconfiguring and making it a better space for everybody involved. So yeah, that's something that sticks out to me. It wasn't an interaction with the museum, but they, you know, allowed that space for us to have for these interactions to happen.
Goodness, sheesh, for sharing that. I think I felt that emotion just in you telling that story, and I think to me at least, the heart of that story is why we're trying to have these discussions right now. I feel like it oftentimes with museums, it comes down to ownership versus stewardship. And it shouldn't be that way. So I appreciate you bringing that story. Kalaax Ṭláa?
So when I worked with the Chicago Field Museum, and we were bringing back Gíidaak, the woman shaman of Duke Island, the situation is we heard that there was a shaman that belonged to the people of the area here, actually down on Duke Island. And so we started doing the research for, because shamans, we could not use the opposite clan to bring her home. We had to use her exact clan because of the spiritual ceremonies that went along with shamans. And so we've myself and an elder from Kaaxwáan, or the Tongass tribe, went down to interview one of the last elders of their people, of actually the specific clan. And we knew exactly, or we had to get exactly where she was buried, or the shamans weren't buried. They were put in a crib or something that was above the ground, kind of at the point. There's a point in this area where all the winds kind of are, lots of wind in that area anyways. So we knew exactly where she was at. And so we asked this elder, and she said, she translated the name of this place, and she said, that's where all the ravens bury their people. And so we're like, oh, okay. So we now know, that this was Raven territory, and this is where the ravens, or the Ganachari, buried their people. So when we wrote the claim, we needed, people to bring to Chicago with us, and they all had to be of the Ganachari clan. And everything just was so, everything just fell into place. It was so in harmony, that when we started asking, we needed somebody to be aligned, because we're repatriating a shaman, and sometimes, you know, you don't know where people are at in their place in life, and, you know, things might be going on, but, you know, we need somebody who is aligned with themselves and their culture. And we had everybody ready. You know, we had a couple of house leaders who were going down with us. And then it was suggested that we have Kaaxwáan Dunn. She's from that clan, and so it was so perfect because, you know, I called her. She knew about us doing, you know, the repatriation, and Kaaxwáan had composed a song. And she composed a song for the return of Gíidaak to come home. And so when we went down to Chicago, the whole, the curator at the time had arranged for us to, you know, to visit. We needed for sure to know that the shaman was gonna study. So they arranged for the Chicago Art Museum that was holding an infrared camera there at the time. And so we had the Chicago Field Museum took a tunic, or it wasn't a tunic, it was the apron of the shaman over to the Chicago Art Museum. And it was clear as day that this was a raven tunic, because you couldn't see anything. The paint was kind of, well, the paint wasn't there at all. And so there we had that with for sure that the shaman was raven. And then when it was time to, you know, bring her home, you know, we have to pack up, get her in Alaska Airlines. We had to arrange with TSA. And it was so, like everything just literally fell into place. There was no hiccups with TSA. And you know how you can't, you know, you're getting patted down there, you know, you can't be let past a certain area. Well, TSA allowed us to go back. We got to place her where, you know, they place, you know, caskets on planes. So we got to place her gently in the area. And TSA was so sensitive to everything that from when we went to Chicago to Seattle, and they were taking her off, and they went to go place her, you know, where they place, you know, the caskets, and you know how they check the suitcases, you know, in there, and then they throw them inside that the cart. Anyways, there was the two men who handled the luggage. They were, you know, putting the stuff, and I was just watching because I could see from my window. He went to go throw a suitcase, and then there was the other baggage handler caught the suitcase in midair and then placed it over on the other side so it wouldn't have landed on the box that held Gíidaak. And then we brought her home. And when we were bringing her home, I believe Kaaxwáan started singing the song. And the pilot, when we flew over to Metlakatla and Ketchikan, the pilot, usually you could come in and you fly into Ketchikan on the island, and then you fly in and you land. The pilot actually went all the way around and circled the whole entire clan territory of this area. He flew her around and flew us around, and then we landed so gently. And then we brought her home. She stayed about a week at one of her clan members' houses. And then we kind of waited for a little while because the weather was bad and we had to get down to Duke Island. Anyways, I think it was like in September or October, there was like just a window of sunshine, and they were able to return her home in the exact spot that she was taken from. And as they were doing the ceremony to return her, an eagle flew over and then dropped a feather, and it just dropped so gently right where she was laying. And it was just so beautiful. But the museum and TSA all worked so diligently to make this happen. And, you know, from a museum that I thought was a pretty strict, frigid museum, just making that connection with the family and making the connections, I guess maybe in their setting, the curator had to contact TSA to get all this coordinated. And that created such a beautiful spiritual moment for the family and the clan by making that connection. So I guess, you know, to reiterate it again, communication and building relationships and partnerships. Just like Dawn said, it is the icing on the cake when you can have, you know, some federal employees share about themselves. And that space was created there in Chicago, where we did have the directors and the curators share about themselves. So I guess that's my story I want to share.
Goodness, sheesh, that was beautiful. We did get a couple of questions in the chat from people, so I wanted to pose to you ladies the first one. Can you, in relation to exhibitions and programs within museums, can you share some ideas about sovereignty in telling your own community's story?
I kind of get a little bit, I don't know if it's not sensitive, but it's a little bit, I guess maybe it's I don't know, I'll just say it. So after seeing many museums across the country, I feel like some of the exhibits show our people in the past, or at a stay still, or kind of dusty. When we're here today, and that, you know, it usually the storyline on those cards are you know, maybe it's the people of the Northwest Coast, they ate, you know, off the land, you know, salmon was their main staple, deer was, you know, also a staple. They were hunters and gatherers, and when that's kind of usually it. That's usually the basic storyline from every, you know, on most museums. But I would love to see museums tell the good, the bad, and the ugly. A real story, or and then progression to what we are today, you know, in all of it, not just I guess maybe a picture frame. I guess maybe like, you know, how Edward Curtis's pictures, the black and whites, where he staged the people, so where they, you know, have their regalia on and they're in a studio of some sort. That's what I feel like we're at a stay still with some museums. I know that the National Museum of American Indian in DC has done a great job at showing a progression in a current day people. But if there is a way that we can show the truth, and it can be done. So the good, the bad, and the ugly, and that we are still here. We are still living a culture. We're alive today.
Absolutely. Kaaxwáan. Kaaxwáan, is there anything you want to add?
Only to add what Irene shared. Our communities are not just rich, but and just to reiterate what she stated, we come from beautiful places. Good things happen in our villages, but there's also so many unhealthy ways of being, whether it's lateral violence, that, comes in the form of bullying. But, just the negativity that can happen on a local level, it's the good, the bad, and the ugly. And, not unlike other communities across this nation, we suffer the same things, from addiction to abuse to, all of the things. And these are a result of what our ancestors went through in contact. And even before then, it's not to say that we didn't have our differences with other communities, because we did. Long histories of clashing with other communities. However, a lot has happened since the early 1900s, late 1800s, when a lot of the stuff that the museums have, that they hold, a lot has changed. Some things have stayed the same. But, with the relationship building that a museum should have with the communities that they reside in, there should always also be a true reflection of what these communities are doing today. I just attended my second Yaakui in Sugpiaq, and that's not a traditional thing that happened in that community. However, it's bringing awareness to the fight that the community is having to save their herring and population, because the state of Alaska wiped out the herring in my community. So these are valuable moments in history that I think a museum could work with the community. That's just one example that could share with their visitors, from all walks of life, from all around the world that they host, to show what life is, in relation to the historical items that they house and take care of, that hopefully will find their way home. That we are a forever evolving community. We have a lot of gifts. We have a lot of people with tons of knowledge to share. I most admire the people that have been living our ways of life in the trenches, that are going out season after season, sharing their knowledge on how they prepare their foods, how they do their arts, sharing with how, an opposite plan approached them and commissioned them to do this, or, when new songs are brought out, that's an emotional thing. And those are very, valid things to show in a museum. We're living, breathing cultures, changing and shifting, and in what is now a small world, because everything's on the internet. I could, get on my phone and Google. I can Google the Duwamish and go to the Burke and try to find their historical items there, so I can learn more about them. Simple things like that. Something that we couldn't do 20 years ago, 23 years ago. But I think it would serve great value to show our current, like Inksa, the land back movement. Our tribes are are relearning. We've been asleep and we're relearning everything, and it's powerful. That's an exhibit in itself. So that's my thoughts. I gotta check out of my hotel room. So Kaaxwáan for having me today.
Kaaxwáan. Beautiful. You know, I love that you both brought in that our cultures continue to shift and change, and even thinking about tribal sovereignty today, even thinking about the Western system that was attempted to be forced upon us when it comes to how we govern our own people. Even that in itself was an act of indigenizing all those spaces, and not living by what the government or what one government dictates how we should care for our people. And it's an act of sovereignty to be able to care for our people exactly how our ancestors taught us. And all of that knowledge that is living today and we're experiencing today is a part of the sovereignty that all of our leadership is continuing to practice, and thinking of new and innovative ways to care for our communities, to care for our people in the best way possible, and weaving in every single aspect of our tribal systems what it means to be a Xaadas, Lingít, Sugpiaq, Yupik, Unanga person. You know, all of these rich cultures are being embedded into our tribes and what it means to be a sovereign today. I think it'd also be a really interesting, as you're thinking about exhibitions and programs, you know, the part of the history that children learn in their Alaska Native Studies program is the one that Wáahlaal was talking about. The one that we used to eat salmon, the one that we used to eat, you know, deer, and we used to practice this way. Instead of talking about what it means to have these layers of governance, of what it means to be a tribe, of what it means to be a corporation, how these different structures have come to evolve to be a part of our culture today. And that's an important story that needs to be told. And our school systems definitely aren't teaching it. So where do people learn this information? They don't, right? Most of this information goes without being told. These stories go without their retelling and the oratory that goes behind them. And so therefore people in our communities and people across Alaska are making decisions every day, are living their life every day without any true indication or understanding of the difference between a tribe and a corporation, of why there's two different bodies that help to care for our communities. And so there's so many aspects of all of that, and I love that you two brought those into this space and have helped folks to see that there's so much more to be told than what predates folks coming here. And that's always a marker of time, right? It's like when your history began, instead of looking at things in a different way and thinking about when our history began and where it continues to go, that we're not invisible, that we're still here, that we're still creating our own true sovereignty and our own cultural norms and practices. Okay, we did have another question, and then I think you ladies saw it. It's about the 3D printed clan hat, and the thought of, you know, does it create a spiritual? Is there a spiritual ceremony associated with that, or do you feel it's appropriate for a museum to do something like that?
I believe the case is that the museum offered a service that not too many, I guess maybe entities can offer with this machine and this technology. And there was a ceremony that was hosted by the clan and the opposite clan. So it continued to have I can't, I guess maybe I can't explain all the details about the ceremony, but I do know that there was ceremony that went along with it. And it was treated with the utmost respect, as if the hat was there itself. So it turned into something sacred also. At least that's what my thought is. I believe you can see the I think the YouTube video is up, and I think it's by the Smithsonian Museum of Natural History.
I appreciate that reflection. You know, it goes to show us that that we don't get to speak for clans that are not our own, and that you know, in accordance with how that clan chose to receive that is how they chose to receive that. And if it was our clan, would we do something different? And we can't presume to be the spokespeople for all clans throughout Southeast. And so I appreciate that. Kaaxwáan, I saw you come off mute.
I was just going to say that, say the same thing, is I wasn't there. I wasn't part of the decision-making of that clan. However, you know, the bigger picture of it is a museum replicated something of significance, huge significance to the clan. And, you know, whether it's too old to handle or if it's going to be going home to the rightful owners, there's something in its place still in the museum, and it's still of value, and it's still something beautiful to behold. And you know, every clan, every family will do things differently. This whole Nagpur and museum relationship is brand new, but you know, it's been being discussed 30, 40 years now, and that's fairly new compared to other relationships. And it's a new space, and I think we should all have grace, but also I believe that tribes should have a huge voice at the table, being that these things were stripped from our homelands, and these items should be, you know, paid reverence to. You know, so yeah, I think that was a good act that a museum did in relationship with the clan, of the items that they were, you know, taking care of for a century or so. So lastly, I know I said that before, but thank you for having me. Hoping that I answered the questions that were put forward. Everybody stay safe.
Stay safe, Kaaxwáan. Safe travels on your way home.
You know, I was thinking about the last couple of questions that we asked. I find myself going back and forth between this conversation. We've had this conversation with small groups of people in the past about the difference between contemporary and traditional, right? We like to use those labels to define periods of time or acts of cultural revitalization. But I really don't like those terms, because I feel like they put our people and our history in a box, when in reality, cultures are living. They always have been. You know, for the Sugpiaq people, we didn't always have beads. We created beautiful pieces with what we found in our area, or we traded with other tribes and clans. It wasn't until someone came into our area that introduced beads that we started using them, because they were available to us, right? It's no different than what we're doing today. We're keeping our cultures alive through adapting and what we have available to us. So when I think about sovereignty and telling our community stories in museums, I mean, both you ladies just completely hit the nail on the head. It's about telling stories that where we are today, that we're still here, we're thriving, we are fighting to keep our cultures at the forefront of everything we do, but our cultures are living. So, Gunash Shawa for bringing that into the conversation. Wáahlaal Gíidaak?
Yeah. We're at that point where we have the opportunity for closing comments. I know that Kaaxwáan had to leave, but Ṭláa, is there anything that you want to close out with?
Thank you for having me here, and then thank you for creating a space to talk about these conversations. I guess my thoughts would be, I guess, for tribes and tribes that are listening, that agreements also need to be made with the traditional clans, and that whatever that looks like, MOUs, MOAs, that there's a clear understanding that these, the clan property still owns, those pieces, and not that there's any tribes not doing that. I'm not saying that, but also the tribes also need to make have a conversation with the traditional clans, so that they also understand. I think as we are moving forward in it's now 2022, 2023, sometimes there might not necessarily be those traditional people at the table who are in tribal positions and tribal leadership positions that are all from that specific area. Like my town that I live in now, Ketchikan, it's a border community. We're Lingít, Haida, and Tsimshian people. We do have Aleut people who also live here in Ketchikan also. And sometimes in some of these leadership positions, you're elected by a board, or you're elected by the membership, or you're elected by shareholders. And it might not necessarily be the people who own those pieces. And so if there was resolutions or motions or MOAs, MOUs, or even committees, that the tribe can start fostering more of relationship with the traditional people also, so that we're working together to in one direction is good, and get in the museums to have conversations with the traditional people, not only the tribe, but the traditional people who own those clan pieces of property.
Yeah, such an important thing to consider and to be aware of, and even more important for folks to have a good understanding and a good rootedness in who we are, and how our structures are made up, and how we and not made up like as in their make believe, but how they're constructed. And our systems today are so important, and if you don't have a good indication of these structures, or our values, or the culture that underlies everything that we and how we conduct ourselves as a people, then you're walking in blind, and it's a tough space to be in, because you can go sideways really fast in our communities. And so I'm really appreciative of that thought process of understanding. Not all regions have a clan system, but we do in Southeast. They do. My father's people in Chestachina and Ahtna territory, they have a clan system. So really important to understand the objects, the relatives that are existing in these spaces, and how they play in. And as a closing comment, I'll just say this. Back to the France example of a French nation. I could probably guarantee that the history of France is told through a museum space, not in just what had taken place in history up until 200 years ago. And where does the story begin and where does the story end? Does the story end for our people once we became colonized and assimilated, and therefore our current history is not worthy of being told? Does it invisibilize the true history? Guaranteed the French museums have stories about French Revolution and things that took place throughout their history. And there's a beautiful story to be told throughout that time frame too, in terms of what our communities have gone through and where we are at today. And I love that we're having this conversation. I love that folks who are witnessing these amazing speakers are asking those important questions and thinking about those important questions that need to be asked. Shilug, any closing comments?
No, I'm just sitting here basking in the wonder of what we got to hear today, and I'm so appreciative that you ladies were able to join us. Kalaax Ṭláa, it was such a pleasure to meet you. I haven't had the opportunity to meet you outside of Zoom yet, and I don't know how that can be, but but I'm happy to be able to share this virtual space with you today, and I look forward to seeing you in person one of these days and getting to have this conversation. And Gunash Chish Kuyana Shanak for all that you do for our people, especially being on the repatriation review committee for the Smithsonian. That's a huge thing that you do for all of our people. And so I just want to honor you in that respect and appreciate you for giving up your time and committing for that. And I look forward to continuing this conversation over the next couple of weeks and having more deeper ones. Next week's going to be a juicy one too. So, Cutmen, shall I turn it over to you to talk about what's coming up?
Yeah, next week we're going to be talking about the necessity of access to our sacred objects and what storage versus stewardship looks like. We'll be asking Indigenous leaders questions like, why do museums store our items? Who are they stored for? Who owns them? And who benefits from that storage? So we hope you'll join us again next Tuesday at 9 a.m.